happens and the future of it. I'm Halima. I am the Black History Month Student Coordinator, and I'm also a Critical Thinking Unit Fellow with AHA. And I'm just going to turn it over so we can get started and have lots of room for questions. So I'm going to let Epic Cole go first. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
All right, my name is Frances Anne Marie Cole, but my pen name is Epic Cole, and I use that in memory of my father, who also was Epic Cole. I'm originally from Sierra Leone, West Africa, but I now live in Maryland, in Germantown, Maryland. I'm a mom of a 25-year-old. My son is 20, well, he'll be 25 in June. And I work for the Patent and Trademark Office in Alexandria, Virginia. So today, this is the smallest group I've ever addressed, and I like it because it's intimate. And don't be shy to ask any questions about FGM. I do not tiptoe around the topic of female genital mutilation. I was raised Catholic, so people think that when they hear of FGM, it's a Muslim thing. It is not a Muslim thing. FGM does not recognize religion, it does not recognize age, it does not recognize socioeconomic backgrounds, none of that. Even the poorest people where I come from find money put together to pay to have the girls undergo female genital mutilation because it is not free. These parents actually pay money to have, the way I put it, their daughters tortured for the rest of their lives. So my mom, who's Creole, did not undergo female genital mutilation because where I come from in Sierra Leone, you have the tribes that do. The Creoles, who think they're the elites of Sierra Leone, do not undergo that rubbish. So my mom didn't undergo FGM. I underwent it because of my stepmother, who's half Lebanese, half Sierra Leonean, who was also Catholic. My mom had nothing to do with it, so I usually just want to put that in there because people always say, oh, it's the moms or the grandmothers or the aunties. In my case, it was none of those people. My stepmother manipulated my father to have myself and my older sister go through. I was age 11. This happened 35 years ago, almost. Yeah, and I still remember that day. It was August 1st, 1984. I would never forget. And they called us to the parlor and told us that we're going somewhere to be made into women. And when we come out, we will have lots and lots of presents. And that's the part that got me. What kid doesn't like presents? So we didn't really know what was going to happen when we got there. My sister had an inkling, but I did not know anything. I was not really prepared for what met us when we went to the secluded area. It was done in it was an area away from where we live. You had to get on the bus. It was like about an hour and a half or 2 hours to the bushes. It's not done in the house. Depends on where you're from. Different cultures do it differently. Some do it in the hospital setting, some do it at home. In our case, they did it in the bushes, and for where I come from, it's a highly demonic practice. So I don't just talk about the physical, the psychological impact. There's also a spiritual impact that affects all of the victims, but most of them they're not even aware of it. So that night, we went there that evening, and we got to this place. It was just a small hut, HET, in the compound, and this huge tree. Every bundle bush, it's called the Bundle Society where I come from. Every bundle bush has a huge tree, a big tree, and that's where they do all their sacrifices, their demonic rituals underneath that tree. And some people believe that when they cut off the clitoris of these girls, they either bury it under that tree or they cook it and give it to the girls to eat. Most people believe that it's actually cooked, hope you don't puke, and given to these girls to eat. And I actually believe that happened because when we were there, one of the so-called ceremonies that they performed, all these women came together and they cooked this really, I can't even describe the food, but it's the most nastiest things I ever tasted. They didn't eat it. It was just for the girls who underwent FGM. So we believe that it's in that food that they actually cooked the clitoris that they amputated from these girls and then fed it back to them. So we got there that night. We were told to undress, and we were led to sit under the tree. My sister and I. They usually perform me on more girls, because the more girls they do that, to the more money they get, because the cutters get paid to do this, like I said earlier. And so we sat there, and they pulled on my sister first. I didn't know what was going to happen to her, and then they came for me. They got me, they blindfolded me. I got my hands, they tied my hands behind my back, and I was led to what I call the bed of death. And it was about half a dozen to a dozen women. My stepmother was amongst them, of course. They laid me on the ground, and I was naked, 11 years of age. And the cutter sat on top of my chest. She was naked, and the only way I knew that she was naked, because while she was cutting, I pulled myself forward, and because the pain was unbearable, I wasn't expecting that. And I beat her bum. Yeah, and so thereafter they gagged me. And so when they were, it was really, really, really painful. When these women talk about that pain, you can't imagine that pain. And it's something that you never forget. It's like the pain shoots up your spine and then goes back down to the soles of your feet and then back up. And that's not even the worst part. The worst part is after that, you feel like peeing, and you had to pee. I didn't know what to expect. This is a freshly cut wound, and I sat there trying to pee. Painful. It's like I was walking on hot coals. So after that evening, they spread you apart. They spread my legs apart. 4 women pinned me down, 2 on my left, 2 on my right. And they handed her a razor. I don't know if it was a razor or a box cutter, but it was the same one that was used on my sister. They only use one. And that's why if they perform FGM on a bunch of girls, and let's say one of them happens to be HIV positive, everybody gets it, because they use the same razor blade or box cutter. So afterwards, they amputated my clitoris. It was so painful. At 11, I didn't even know what a clitoris was. I didn't even know I had that. And I was led to sit back under the tree. I was covered in blood. I don't know if that's where the phobia started. I don't like the sight of blood. I can't see blood. Not even the one that's depicted in films. I can't stand the blood. And it took us forever to heal. 34, 35 years later, I'm still not healed. I still battle with post-traumatic stress disorder. And last year, I actually just started receiving therapy. I spoke at the Department of Justice in DC, and they just announced that, hey, I need therapy if you know of any therapists. And so somebody reached out to me. Her name is Joanna Vagoth. She's extremely great. She does it for free. She said it's her way of giving back to these women. I know Ellen will talk more about the medical aspect of it, right, because she's done some research. I'll leave that to her. But in my advocacy work, I've worked with legislators in Virginia and Maine and Pennsylvania. In Virginia now, FGM is a misdemeanor. So it carries, a felony. It carries 25 to life. I was so happy they passed that bill last year, July 1st. So even if you take a child across from Virginia into another city, you'll still get 25 to life. And just 2 weeks ago, we also, because I sit on the board of Global Women Peace Foundation. It's a foundation in DC, the only foundation in DC that actually works with survivors of female genital mutilation. And we work with Senator Black, and now FGM is going to be taught in the middle schools and high schools in all of Virginia. So that's also a win for us, because it's happening. Most people don't even know, up to now, don't even know what female genital mutilation is. They don't believe it's happening in America. And my thing is, as long as you have immigrants from practicing countries, it is happening in your neighborhoods. I'm sure it's happening here in Michigan. It's happening here. You never know. We don't walk around looking at me. You wouldn't even know that I underwent FGM. And there are 3 types of FGM. You have type 1, which is the amputation of the clitoris, and the whole type 2, they remove some of the labia, and type 3, which is infibulation. They remove the clitoris, the labia, and then they stitch these women up. And that's prevalent in Ethiopia, Eritrea, Sudan, Somali, the Gambia. Where I come from, I thought that it was just type 1 that was done to me, just the amputation of the clitoris, but it is not, it wasn't. 2017, I believe, I had reconstruction surgery in California. Dr. Bowers did it for me, and it was paid by Global Women Peace Foundation. They paid for my surgery. I was just curious. It's not as if I really wanted it, but I was just curious to see. I was like the guinea pig. I said, oh, let's find out. I really want to know what this is about. So when I went there for my pre-op, she told me that it wasn't type 1 that was done to me, it was type 2. I actually had my labia also removed, and I didn't know that. You know, the woman who amputated my clitoris was so drunk. That's the other thing. They get together before they cut these girls, and they drink a lot of alcohol, and it's not even the good type, you know. I don't know if there's good alcohol, but you know, like moonshine, right? That kind of stuff. They get high on that, and so she didn't even know what she was doing. My sister actually passed out twice. She almost died from bleeding, you know. So she said, Francis, it wasn't type 1 that was done, it was type 2, and I got angry all over again. You know, because imagine all my life I thought it was just the amputation of the clitoris, and she was the one that actually told me that the hood was also removed. I'm like, what's the hood? And she said, yeah, the clitoris has a hood, and if it's not aroused, it hides under the hood. So in order for them to get to the clitoris, they had to remove the hood. And so, but I had my surgery almost 2 years ago, it'll be 2 years in September, and I'm a different person. When that happens to girls and women, you think that you're complete. When we're born with this organ, with this body part, and when it's removed from us, we feel less than the regular women who did not undergo female genital mutilation. And some people blame us. I had nothing to do with it. I was 11, I wasn't given the choice to say no. The only way I could fight was when this woman sat on top of me and started to amputate my clitoris. That's the only fight I put up. But then when you're also there, the reason why most survivors don't talk about it, they brainwash these girls into believing that if you tell anyone who's not a member, you'll die, your stomach will swell and you'll die. And I thought it was just my country, but it's all around. That's what every person I've spoken to, it doesn't matter what country, they tell them that if you talk about it, you'll die. And that's why little girls will not talk about it, because kids are afraid of dying. But the minute I got out, I went back to school. I was a rebellious child. I told my friend who did not undergo FGM, and then I went home to actually see if my stomach was swollen and I'll die. That didn't happen, so I started talking about it, because that was my way of rebellion. That was the only way I see that it was a revenge, because it was a secret society. You're not supposed to talk about it, but me talking about it, to me, in my child mind, was like, yeah, I'm getting back at this woman for what they did. So I had my surgery. I almost didn't want to go through, because I thought the pain was going to be like when I underwent female genital mutilation, but I felt no pain afterwards. Of course, my vagina was numb, but it wasn't no pain, no shooting pain or nothing. I'm still in recovery. I also, after my surgery, something happened, and I had to be flown to Paris to see Dr. Pierre Foldis, who's one of the pioneers of the reconstruction surgery. I realized that the suture that was used to do the surgery, I was allergic to it. And for 8 weeks straight, my vagina I just itched, and it was the most uncomfortable thing. I used Vicks Vapor Rub on my hoo-ha. There was one time, I tried, my doctor, she was just experimenting because she didn't know what was going on, and she was also scared of a lawsuit. So she kept saying, oh, it's the healing process. Healing process for 8 weeks, I had to be dependent on sleeping pills just to be able to sleep at night. There was one night, it was so bad. I don't know how many women in here have actually had yeast infection. You scratch it and it feels so good. You continue to scratch, and the minute you let go, it burns really, really bad. And that was what I had went through for 8 weeks. And so finally I went to Paris, and Dr. Foldis took a look at me. I said it was done, just a minor change, but nothing really big. So that was a relief. And I always tell people that, you know, there's always a silver lining no matter what happens to you. Yeah, at 11 I had that done to me, but hey, my vagina took me to Paris free of charge. I had always wanted to go. I had always wanted to go to Paris. I was there for 2 weeks. I had fun. I had a great time, and I traveled telling my story to just, you know, I don't tell my story just to let people feel sorry for me. I don't need PT. You know, I tell because it's a form of therapy for me. And now some other women who are looking for this surgery see me as a mentor, and I mentor most of them because we always fear that something bad is going to happen because it's your vagina. You think that what happened to you is going to happen again. The pain that you went through, you're always going to have that pain again. And some of these women who actually, depending on the type of FGM that was done, the impact, the psychological impact varies. It's different. So like, for example, I underwent type 2. My pain may not be the same compared to the woman who went through type 3, because in fibrillation, they have to be defibrillated again. When they're defibrillated, they remove the labia, the clitoris, and they stitch them up, and they leave just a tiny hole for urination. And some of these women, it takes them 30 minutes just to have one urination, and it's always painful. So theirs cannot be compared to mine, but pain is pain. So I think I'll stop there, and if you have any questions later, we can discuss my vagina. Like I said, I'm not ashamed to talk about that. That's the reason I'm here. So
thank you.
Thank you so much. Wow, that was like, quite honestly, emotional and a little moving, or very moving. And I just want to thank F.A. Cole for sharing. She'll still be here for questions, but let Ellen talk for a little bit now.
Okay. I need to get my PowerPoint up, and I'm not sure how to do it.
Oh.
Yeah. Can you help me? Let's see what escapes from that one, probably. Yeah. And yeah, my name's Ellen Gruenbaum. It's spelled wrong on that poster. It's Gruenbaum, in case you wanted to find out any more about me. I know we both have presence on the internet, probably, in case people wanted to follow up. Thank you very much. I can take care of the arrows then if that's going to work. Thanks a lot. Yeah, I'm an anthropologist, and I'm a professor at Purdue University, where I've been for the last 10 years. My interest in this subject started when I was in Sudan many years ago. I went to Sudan as a graduate student, trying to find an opportunity to study something related to women's health. I'm a medical anthropologist, so I've had a lot of interest in malaria, schistosomiasis, and all the other kinds of things. But one of the people that I met early in my research was a midwife in a rural village who was very proud of the work that she did as a circumciser, and she let me know what she did, let me understand how it worked. I got to see women give birth and how the defibrillation works when they're in labor, and so all of that led me to try to understand this practice better, and I began to write about it, and it has become something that I've written a lot about. And eventually, after many years when we didn't, many of us who were not Sudanese did not feel that we should be the ones taking the lead in talking about it, but later we were able to have a lot of collaborations, and we were also struck by the fact that a lot of people had misunderstandings of the fact that it was so variable how these practices are done. So the experiences of the Bundu ritual in Sierra Leone are some of the most terrifying, and you've given us your experience in the most terrifying. There are also some that are much less terrifying, and some that are, you know, much less harmful in terms of the physical alteration of the tissues. And yet we've developed a global consensus now that all forms of it violate human rights, and so we need to be concerned about all the different forms of it. So I hope today I can show you a little bit about that. This is the name of the book that I wrote, and I'm working on another book now that's about activists and the change process and how things are going on. So maybe we'll have to do an interview sometime. You're part of the process too. My work was really to understand, whatever we want to influence change or influence human behavior, we really need to understand why people do it. So my work as an anthropologist is to talk with people and listen to them and understand what they're doing and watch their daily lives. So I had the great good fortune to be able to spend those early 5 years in Sudan when I was young, and then I've been going back at intervals ever since and trying to stay for a month or two whenever I can. Most recently I was there in 2017, and I've continued to study how this is variable with the different things that are done in different parts of the country. And I've also been a consultant with Unicef to try to help them develop better programming, both there, and I was fortunate 10 years ago to have a chance to be in Sierra Leone for 5 weeks and do a project there with some colleagues at Unicef in Sierra Leone. So I've gotten a wonderful opportunity to learn more about the Bundu ceremonies as well as the rituals they do in Sudan. Now, we want to know really what they do compared with what other people think they do, if there are variations in the regions, all of that's going to be important. But if you look at a map of the countries affected by these practices, you can see that this is a vast swath of Africa. This is a lot of different cultures represented. The Bundu rituals that were described by Efe are found not only in Sierra Leone, but also in some of the neighboring countries. And that's why she can say that people from other countries have the same experience. And yet, if you come over to Egypt, they don't practice the Bundu. They're not doing that at all. And people over here have never heard of the Bundu, and yet they might have very severe forms of the surgeries. What this map represents is not the severity of the type of operation, but rather the percentages of people who are affected by some form of this. The way we measure that is something called a prevalence rate, which means the number of people who have had it done to them in the past in a particular age group. 15 to 49 is the age groups that we measure prevalence for. And I say we, this is an international effort, not me personally. But the numbers that you see here, like Mali, 89%, that means 89% of the women between the ages of 15 and 49 have had some form of it done to them. Now, we don't know whether they've got type 3, type 2, type 1, but they will have had some form done. And this gives us sort of a rough comparison of where are the problems going to be most severe, where there are the most numbers affected, where there's the most urgency, perhaps. But anyway, these are efforts that are made, and I'm really excited about the fact that we have at last begun to have more quantitative data for these countries. As you can see, the country where I worked, Sudan, the percentage is 88%, and it's, in the most recent figures I've seen, they say 87%. So it's like gradually dropping. But a very exciting aspect of this is that I'm going to show you later some changes by age groups, so you can see how the change is happening. But let me first describe that in Sudan, it's not something done in groups like the Bundu is, and the women are not drunk, they're not violent. In fact, they are very loving parents. It's usually done one person at a time. When it's your day, as this young woman is, she got a new dress. I went to her house at the invitation of the midwife, and she was being, she had a very different experience. Her midwife used medical equipment, and she was very careful about pain mitigation, and she tried very hard to make sure the girls didn't feel the pain. And she also talked to the mother about how much she should cut off, because she said she didn't want to cut too much if the mother didn't want much cut off. So it was a very different situation than the first part of the time. This picture is from Sierra Leone, And you can see this is more like the Bundu celebration that she was talking about, with the older women being all excited and joyful, and the younger women looking a little more serious. They're the young women who are going through the initiation. So anyway, I wanted to also say that another big part of my work, which is what we were asked to talk about, Halima wanted us to talk about our work. Another big part of my work is to counter some misinformation and misunderstandings that have led a lot of people to be really negative toward all Africans or all Muslims or all black people. And so we're trying to counter that by saying, look, there's change happening. African people are taking the lead in the change. Muslim people are taking the lead in the change. And there's a lot going on that you need to understand so you don't make stereotypical judgments. And so let me just summarize here, because I know this is one of the questions that Halima wanted to ask us later, was about, is this a Muslim problem? Is this an African problem? No. Several religious groups practice this. Not all Muslims practice it. Some do, some don't. Not all Africans practice it, as you saw from the map. So there are groups, ethnic groups in a country that practice it and some that don't. Neighbors in the same country. Like you were mentioning, the Creole. Most of the Creole don't do it, but most of the other ones do, the Mende and the Kono and all those. So female genital cutting practices, like male genital cutting practices, are found in many different countries and regions of the world, so it's not unique to any one group. Okay. Now, is change happening? Where and how fast is another question that I like to ask, because I think it's important for us to figure out, if change can happen, how do we help accelerate it? If we agree that it's a violation of children's human rights, we should want to know, what can we do to be helpful at facilitating this? So changes are happening everywhere in every country, and in some countries we see the prevalence reductions. If you look at a prevalence figure for 1 year and then 5 years later, you can see that that's not going to drop real fast, because all the people that used to be in it who've had it done, they're still in that if their age cohort is still in that. So the numerator doesn't change fast enough to make a rapid drop in prevalence. What we're hoping for is a rapid drop in incidence, that is, the new cases. But you don't see that too clearly from the prevalence statistics internationally. However, if you look at these figures, I think you'll see something very interesting. I know you can't see it very clearly, but I wanted you just to have an overview of the difference between what this shows is the prevalence in the 40 to 45 age group as compared with the prevalence in the 15 to 19 age group. Now, most of the cultures practice female genital cutting before the age of 15. Sometimes it laps over into 16, 17-year-olds, but not very commonly. So if you look at every single one of these, the dark bar is the prevalence for the older age group, and the lighter bar is the prevalence for the women who are 25 to 30 years younger than they are. And look, Somalia, with the highest rate, went from 99 to 97 in that age group. Hardly budged at all. Somalia has not changed as much as some other places. But if you look at a place like Kenya, it's 49% for that older age group, but only 15% for the younger age group. So the potential for Kenya to have rapid change to end the practice is really good. And I think it's a really nice thing for us as researchers to do, and I would challenge anybody who's really interested in a nice project to say, okay, what's going on here? What did Kenya do that was different than what Somalia did? And did that have an impact on what's happening? Let's see, since we've been talking about Sierra Leone is not changing rapidly, but it is changing, went from 96 to 80. When I was there 11 years ago, it was such a taboo subject among so many people. They said, no, it will never change. Don't even talk about it. We don't want to hear about change. And yet it is changing, but just much more slowly than a place where they've fully embraced educating people about change like Kenya has. All right, so let me tell you 3 stories that I hope will help illustrate for you what's going on with the potential for change in the countries of Africa. Particularly, I know Sudan the best, but as you can see, Sudan has a high rate, so what they're doing is going to make a big difference because there's a lot of people affected. Well, this is Basena. She's the midwife that I met back in 1977, and she's the one who first got me involved in questioning what was going on here. She showed me the type 3 infibulations, and how she did the surgery. I got to see how people celebrated it. The whole community, the families came around, cooked special food. They had greetings and gifts, and it was a very nice occasion. It wasn't like the Bundu where it's a secret society, but rather was a more open. But she was a government-trained midwife, and this picture that I took of her in 2004, she had been called, I was there just for a few days visit in the village, and she had been called to do a circumcision. So I went with her that morning, and this is how she looked, dressed for a circumcision. She's carrying her box of equipment, because she's medically trained, not as a doctor, but as a midwife with proper understanding of antibiotics and so on. But you can see she's of that older generation that have facial scars. The younger women don't like those anymore. They don't do facial scars. But she's the older generation. She also became more religious through her life and started to wear the inner scarf to cover her hair because she believed that's what a good Muslim woman should do. Now, she, in the course of the time that I've known her, from the 70s to when I interviewed her in 89 and 90, she had come to the idea that Islam doesn't want you to do type 3. Islam, she said, should allow only type 1. So she said, I want to change to type 1. They didn't call it that at the time. She called it Sunnah. She said, I want to change to Sunnah, but the people in my village are demanding type 3. So I talked to her again 2 years later, and she was still 3 years later, and she was still saying the same thing. I want to change, but the people still want the other one. Well, within a few years after that, by about 1994, the people in the community had begun to change their minds. They'd been listening to public health education, they'd been talking to the educated women in the community, and they became convinced they should do the less severe form. And the whole community switched over to the less severe form in the 1990s. Then I went back to visit her again. This picture was from 2 years ago when I was last there. And she said, she told me the story of how she had now, after having done the less severe form for a while, had come to the conclusion, because she went to another workshop, and the government was asking the midwives to take the pledge that they would never again do any circumcision. Now, some of the midwives took that as a pledge to not do infibulation, but she understood that it was a pledge not to do any at all. So she decided that that was the end of circumcision in her community. And so she didn't do any more after about 2011. And then I met 2 young women who were said to be the last young women to have undergone female genital cutting in the community, because even after Basena had said she quit doing it, the mothers of these girls were so determined to get them circumcised, they called in another midwife from outside who came. They said she came sneaking in at night, and they had her do the circumcisions. But she got caught by the medical assistant who chased her away, and basically this community has become now a place where, no, we don't do it anymore. And these girls said, we were the last ones. We're not mad at our mothers. We know they didn't really mean to hurt us because they were trying to do what they thought was right. They thought it was to make them proper young women. And so they forgave their mothers, but they said, our daughters won't be circumcised. They were absolutely confident. So this community has succeeded in making the change. It took a very long time. And so what can we do to help communities so inclined to make the change work a little faster? So one of the ways is religious leaders, because a lot of people think it's based on Islam or based on spiritual work that they're supposed to be doing. So even though most religious leaders say it's not related to Islam, you find that many of the people who are Muslims in Sudan don't really know the details of theology. They just assume that because we're Muslims and we've always done it and our grandmothers did it, and it must be Muslim. So it takes some religious leaders to speak up and say, and try to educate people. And they don't all agree. There's a couple of religious leaders in Sudan who still want to promote circumcision. But some of the others are willing to say, look, it's not in the Quran. It's not something that the Prophet Muhammad insisted we do. There's a saying that the Prophet Muhammad said, you could circumcise, but don't do too much damage. Just do a little bit. So it sounded like the Prophet Muhammad might be endorsing type 1. But other people say, no, that's not right. He wasn't endorsing type 1. He was just saying, you know, if you must, go ahead, but I'd rather you didn't. So the interpretation of what did his saying mean is still a subject of, I hear a lot of discussions among Muslims in Sudan about that. So one of the men that I got to know is Abdul Rahman. He's a local religious leader, and he was in a village in Western Kordofan, where a group of us under Unicef we were doing some surveys with the families of the girls who were certain age groups. And Abdul Rahman had, through his own independent reading of the Quran, come to the conclusion that Muslims should not circumcise girls. And he had said this to the leaders of his community, but he said, I felt like I was standing alone. No one was listening to me. Well, then he got a little help from Unicef, because Unicef hired a very articulate religious leader named Ali Samaj to go around and conduct workshops with village religious leaders. And he had a very nice way of working. What he would do is ask to meet with the sheikh of the village and his senior elders, the ulama, if you know religious terminology in Arabic. So he went to the communities in the area, including Sheikh Abdul Rahman's community, and he would offer them a conversation about, he said, well, now who created us? Well, God created us. And did God do a good job creating us? And they'd say, yes, he did. Did he make any mistakes, any things that we needed to cut off of the young girls? And so he would engage them in a way to get them thinking about this, and then presented them with documents and quotations from the Quran and the Hadith, and say, please study these, and I'll come back in 2 weeks and we can have another conversation. So he was allowing people to come to their own wisdom about things in a very thoughtful way. I was impressed with the kind of work that both of these men did. And for the community of Sheikh Abdul Rahman, he had told people, once the ulama agreed that this wasn't Islamic, he said, let's stop doing it in our community. So when we interviewed the families, we found a lot of the families said, I don't know about this. They'll make fun of my daughter. The peer group will make fun of her. Men won't marry her. She will be an outcast if I don't circumcise her. So they were worried. But in the 2 years between his declaration and our survey, not a single girl had been cut. And it was sort of like the whole community was developing a wait and see attitude. So if you can get a wait and see attitude, then supply some additional inputs into that, this could be a very fantastic way for change to happen. Now, one of the international organizations that's been most well known is Unicef, because Unicef has taken a position that is against girls' human rights, and they have programs in every affected country. And my colleague Samira Amin Ahmed, who's also she's a Sudanese anthropologist, she and I worked together on a research project in 2004. And after that project, we were critical of the fact that so much of the teaching about female genital cutting was very scary stuff. You know, it was like it tended to tell people it was bad for you, it would harm you greatly. Well, some of the types do a lot of physical harm, but some types don't do as much. For example, the women in Sudan who had only a portion of the clitoris removed didn't know that actually the clitoris is a large organ that surrounds the vagina, and there's erectile tissue within the woman. So it's possible for women to have very satisfying sexual lives without their clitoris if they aren't in a lot of pain, if it hasn't been a big injury for them or a traumatic situation. Some of the women told me, hey, your husband would divorce you if he got a chance to have a relationship with a Sudanese wife. They were joking with me, of course, but what they were trying to say was that they had a very good life. Now, that positive attitude of the older women, I think, could be carried forward in a different way. If we look at the positive, instead of telling them, you're crazy, you're damaged, if they don't feel damaged, instead tell them things could be even better. So what can you do to make a positive way of stating things? Well, one thing we discovered was that there was no word in Sudanese Arabic for an uncut girl that wasn't negative. It was all, halfa, niksa, and things that meant, she's kind of a slut, or she's not cut, or, there's something wrong with her, or something lacking. So Samira did something that we came up with as a recommendation in our report. She called together Sudanese artists, poets, religious leaders, medical leaders, and educators for a little workshop, a 2-day workshop, to look at all the posters and all the communications that had been done against female circumcision, and to say, what's wrong with these? How could we do it better? Is there a positive word we could come up with? And they came up with the word salima, which is derived from the Arabic words for healthy, happy, and whole. And they developed a whole campaign around this with songs and so on. This is the poster. And here is one of the Salima ambassadors, one of the fantastic football stars, and he's actually also a popular singer named Farfour. They call him Farfour. And a religious leader, Al-Karuri. Now, these pictures were on billboards in 2013 to try to get major celebrities to be proponents of Salima, with the slogan, which was on this poster, which is, every girl is born Salima, let her grow up Salima. So this has become something that is really lovely. This is their, I don't know if this will work, but let me try. Okay, this is just about a 30-second thing. Oh, you're blocking your view. Oh, you want to get it over there? Okay. It's on split screen, so you have to grab it over. There. Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Okay, this has appeared on television, and it's a sort of thing that is intended to inspire people. It's on YouTube if you want to look it up on your own. You can get it with translation on YouTube too. The whole country has become Salima, she said, and they say things about keeping. So some of the commentaries are, let the girls be like God created them. Let them be Salima. And that's been a very nice message. What I'm going to be very excited to see in the future is whether this kind of positive message paired with the other lessons about the potential for harmful effects will be just the combination that people need to really begin to make rapid change in Sudan. So this, again, you can just look up Salima on YouTube and you'll find this and the posters that they've done. So I also just want to close with the fact that it's not unique to Africa, of course, and you may have noticed on the map there are a couple countries in Asia, and in the Middle East, and there's also some countries in Asia, South Asia and Indonesia, where different forms of female genital cutting are done. None of them quite as severe as the type 3 that was done in Sudan and Somalia. But I think it's important that you recognize that North America did do some clitorectomies, in the medical context. Up until the middle of the 20th century, there were actually some women being treated for masturbation and other hysteria and other of those women's diseases that they thought would be helped by clitorectomy. So those were done in American hospitals. They were stopped by about the middle of the 20th century. And so doctors and community leaders have worked together in all of, on the issue of immigrants. FA mentioned the making it illegal, and that's been, legal changes have been very important. But legal changes only go so far if you don't have the people behind them. Because as she said, they might be doing it in the privacy of their homes. So I was very impressed in Italy with seeing the Somali immigrants and the Italian doctors working together to try to do a similar type of campaign of positive images. Okay, thank you. That's about all I wanted to say. I have lots more to talk about, but you know, I only get 15 minutes and I probably took 25. Sorry.
It's okay. So I have some questions, but before we get to the questions, there's another quick video that I would like to show.
Great. I'll come over here where I can see it better.
I have to leave the room. PTSD. I don't watch those type of things. So I'll be back.
Hold on. This does not look like. This is definitely not the right bit. Sorry, one second. Here we go.
How important is FGM and purity to young men from active communities living in the UK?
Sex before marriage is a no go.
It would be nice that the future wife that should be a virgin.
I just can't see myself marrying a person that's been around the block.
Most modern men think that circumcision is a good thing for women.
I'm not going to say it's right or wrong. If my faith allows it, then it allows it. If it doesn't allow it, then it doesn't allow it.
I heard if you take it off, then it calms the person down. So it keeps her calm, like rather than being a supermarket that's open to everyone. It's just she's cooled out. That's what everyone's thinking.
Despite all the talk, I doubt these young guys even know what FGM really is. It's just not a topic boys and men talk about. It's a big secret, and I would not be surprised if any of these men said to me, I don't know the procedure of FGM, because that really is the reality of it. I've invited him to East London, where I've curated a vagina gallery. Before I reveal exactly what FGM entails, first I need them to understand what's going to be lost. This is the Great Wall of Vaginas. So, basically, the whole point of this is to show that we are all different. I mean, you can come close if you want to have a look and just see, no? Why? No? You want to stay distant? Embarrassed?
Yeah.
It's just we're not used to the revealing and everything like that.
Guys, next, I want to show them what FGM really involves. These are my giant vulvas. First I'm going to show you is how FGM type 1 happens. Yeah? Right. I'm going to show you exactly what happens. So, that's clitoris and that's the clitoris hook. Yeah? So this is type 1. Type 1 is either pricking like that, and then blood has to flow through. Certain communities, type 1 usually means cutting this off. Are you struggling to even just look at it? A lot of women who've gone through FGM don't feel pleasure because of what has happened, because that part of their body was traumatized basically. It's like someone stabbed you. It's very difficult to reconnect with that part of your body again. You feel sick, yeah? You feel dizzy? Okay. Is it after seeing what I showed you? Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah, I
just feel sorry for people who have to go through that. But when you hear of it, you just seem to think that it's any man or thing. When you actually see that, it's just real. Like, why could you do that to a child?
Now I'm going to show you how type 3 is performed. All of this has to be cut away. See? All of it. All of it. This is the small end I'm cutting away now, yeah? Next, the large lobe is also removed. What? Yep. So this is a needle on a thread. After everything was cut off, right, you have to pull the remaining skin together. Then you start sewing that through. So basically all of this will be closed to a point. Can you see that small hole?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's smaller.
This one.
Well, apparently.
That's torture.
I feel like you guys are in shock or something. Am I wrong? You're speechless. Yeah.
When people usually do this kind of thing, is it a mom that suggests doing this or the mom or the dad that suggests doing that?
The whole community plays a role because if they find out that you haven't been cut, you'll be stigmatized. A lot of mothers with sons would say, don't get married to that girl because she's not clean. She wouldn't say FGM, she will refer to it as not clean. And that's what it usually means.
Unseen.
Finally, I'll show them images of FGM taking place and its effects.
That's babies.
Those are babies.
Yes. The reason I've got these pictures up is that so you guys can see what we've been talking about. That's type 3.
Sad, man.
And that's a real person who lives like that every day.
That's not fair, man.
My question is to you guys. Are you willing to join my campaign?
Yeah, I'm willing.
You're willing?
100%.
Be realistic, like, any of us are gonna have like sons and daughters, and I'm sure none of our daughters and our sons want this to go through, innit? So, madness.
Madness.
Why are we doing this? Why are our elders doing this? Why are they not doing nothing about it? Because me, this is the first time I've ever seen this, and now I'm completely against it.
That was just amazing what's happening there. I mean, these young men were they were engaging with me, they were genuinely upset, they were angry. I mean, those young men, when they become parents, those girls are saved now. One of them made that very, very clear. And he was so sorry about it, and that really touched me. And to see that just makes this all worth the while.